So I want to pivot now to the good news that the way that we think is changeable. And there's a lot of evidence to show that we can rewire our brain until we're 90. I don't know if my brain's going to be rewirable until I'm 90, but that's a long time to be able to rewire it. And if you decide to rewire it. So I call this rewiring. I love to call it the school of unlearning. And I have to give credit that I saw this name in a book that many people know. It's called The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. And if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's full of beautiful wisdom for life. And they made a short film that actually won an Academy Award from the book. The film is not nearly as good as the book. It has these beautiful illustrations, which you might want to put up in your office. It's so good. And I don't get any money from it. I just love the book. And he has a page that is, I wish there was a school of unlearning. And so I stole that from him because I think it's the perfect way to think about how we might want to move forward and be able to practice in a way that's more sustainable. So two caveats about the school of unlearning is that it takes time to unlearn. It took you however many years you are to build these habits. And so it takes actual time practicing unlearning them. It takes not the same amount of time, but it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight because what you practice grows. And so you've been practicing all these habits and you have not been practicing focusing on how things might turn out okay, or focusing on patience, for example. The other thing is that these patterns were generally hardwired during training, which is a time of trauma. And I don't know a physician who doesn't think it's a time of trauma. And things that are trained in a time of trauma where your basic needs are not being met, sleep, think, sleep, food, restroom, they stick more and they're a bit harder to untrain. So having compassion for yourself as you do some of this work, that it takes time, especially in physicians. And I do work with some people who are not physicians who work, for example, are lawyers or work for Google, and they untrain a lot faster. And so I just have noticed these patterns, and I think we need to be kind and patient to ourselves, which is not one of our specialties. So what is needed to unwind these thought patterns and change? The first thing is to be aware of them. And so that's why that's objective number one. Recognize the thought patterns that you have and how they're impacting you and how they are adding to your stress and distress. Number two is to slow down and pause, get out of fight or flight, work on your nervous system, upregulate your parasympathetic nervous system, and maybe downregulate your sympathetic. Most doctors are completely out of sync there. And so can you get them a little bit closer? And that's a practice that takes time and you practice it. That's why people talk about practicing mindfulness regularly. Mindfulness upregulates your parasympathetic nervous system. We also have to practice self-compassion. We can't hate ourselves into change. We can't just whip ourselves into changing this. It doesn't work. It doesn't stick. It doesn't last. We also can't rewire or change from a place of empty or below empty. So if you are completely depleted, completely burnt out, completely exhausted, you need to actually expend a little bit of energy repleting yourself. And mindfulness and self-compassion can be part of that. We'll talk about it. But noticing what repletes you and taking micro moments during the day to do that can be, we tried a minute at the beginning and it felt great. So can you do some of those things? The last piece is the mindset work. We can practice new ways of thinking intentionally and acting, and remembering that what we practice grows and what we don't practice recedes. That's the good news. So you can shift just slightly, shift your GPS a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And over time, you have quite a bit of change. 1% of change, 1% change, 5% change. As doctors, one of the thought patterns I didn't bring up today is all or none. We're like, I haven't changed, I'm failed. It's not changeable. It's tiny little bits, little by little by little by little. We didn't become doctors overnight.